Welcome to Chandwell. Another week, another project. If we go down underneath the station to where the printer is, we'll see what's coming out. Here is a template for the next 3 viaduct arches, which are going to go next to the wide arch, which I talked about last time. So using the template, I've created this, the first arch. So I'm making the arches very similar to how I did the skew bridge. It's basically just a box with arch front and back and one in the centre to hold the actual arch. I've used a little bit of a sliver of cardboard across the top just to hold the thing in place, hold it square. Looks alright, so we'll try and put it under the layout and see how it fits. So we've got 3 boxes, 3 arches all made. They look really good together. It's going to work out quite nicely, I think. They all follow the same design, refined it a little bit and chopped out bits and pieces here and there to fit wires through. I'm a little bit damaged on the top, but structurally this sound, I think it's going to make a good basis for the viaduct. So each one will run underneath the track like this. Because getting the angles right is going to be a bit of a challenge, I'm going to glue each one down individually and let the glue dry. Need to work out what I'm going to do with these wires. There's quite a lot of spring in them. So we'll start with the first arch, we'll get that glued down and dried, and then we'll work out how the next arches are going to go. We'll start off here, just next to the wide arch. A little bit of tape keeps the wires out of the way. When I was originally wiring the layout, I did make sure that each of the wires was a little bit longer than they needed to be, so I could move them side to side when I actually came to build the viaduct. Once they're in place and once they're taped down, the arch fits in really nicely. Before we glue anything down though, of course, we need to get the brickwork of the arches in place. So I've used Scalescenes brown brick again, just covered it around the arch in a similar technique to what I did with the wide skew arch. But I've left the wraparound stone edges sticking out like this, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to mount the front of the viaduct on once the arches are in place and we have the angle of the curve correct. So we will put the front on and then wrap round those little flaps at the end. Okay, so here are 3 viaduct arches. I've just put the last coat of matte varnish on the inside. It's just drying now, which is why it looks quite shiny, but it's the same varnish as I've got everywhere else, so I'm confident that it will all look good when it's finished. So the next step is to get the 3 arches placed under here. Now I've cut each one, as I've already said, 5mm smaller than they need to be so that they fit under. This cut that I took off was at the bottom, so they then go up like this. So we've got a 5mm gap at the bottom, so that this then comes up to here, and the tops of these are 1mm below the track bed, because there's a 1mm ledge goes on top, and this represents the same level that the track is laid. So I think my measurements are all correct. That looks about 1mm there. So it's getting them under the tracks. The thing I want to do mainly is to make sure that this angle is right on the curve. Obviously if I go straight, we'll end up with the viaduct coming into here and having a sharp curve here, which we don't want. But at the same time, if I do too much like this, that is also doesn't look right and is silly. So what I need to do is, once all 3 are cut and have the spaces for wires and things sorted out, we'll put it in and just adjust them ever so slightly so that they're more or less, parallel 90 degrees to where the track is at that particular point. It's a really important step to get them right, but my plan is I'll get them in and I'll glue them down. Once they're glued, I can then concentrate on getting the front in place. The one on the inside of the curve will be easy because the space between the pillars will be consistent and exactly as designed, but at the back there will be a gap slightly because each one's a slightly wider angle than the one behind. So we're going to have to do some measuring and some sticking. I could leave the backs off completely because you'll never see them, but the plan is, just in case any time I want to take a photograph from behind. Obviously I'll need them to be as good as possible. So that's the next step. So here we are, 2 arches glued into place, 1 left to go. So those bouncy wires, the springy wires that I was looking at earlier, they've been sorted out as well with a judicious application of some tape. So they're going to fit right between the second and the third arch. So let's go on and glue the next one down. Okay, so here we are with the 3 arches in place. First of all, to get them to the right height, I've used stacks of card cut out to the necessary height. I've got 4 pieces of 1mm card plus 1 or 2 pieces of cereal packet card. The way I've worked out the height is basically to get the top of this part of the arch to 1mm below the top of the baseboard. As I explained before, this is to give a consistent height to the whole thing, where the ledge is meant to be the height at which the track is laid. So if we look, the top of this is at exactly the right height for the ledge, so that when the time comes to actually put the ledge on, it matches up perfectly with the piece of bridge that's already there. And that is then a consistent height all across all 3 of them. The track isn't 100% level. It does ascend slightly to the left of the layout, only very slightly. It's about 1mm, 2mm over maybe 1.5 meters. So this side of the arch, this side of this arch is propped up 1 layer of cereal packet higher than the other ones. It's not noticeable at all to the naked eye, but that's good because there will be slight variances as it goes along. Now, to get the curve consistent, which is partly what I was worried about, I've just used a simple method. First of all, you'll see that the distance between these 2 arches is slightly less than the distance between these. This is because the curve tightens a little bit around here, while they're all still together at the front. So all I did for that was very simply measured the distance from the sleepers to the fronts of the arches. So this sleeper here to the front of this arch is 16mm. I then just did the same here. I measured there to there, and that's 16mm, and then I've done the same again. So from there to there was 16mm. So that was easy enough to do. I've remembered to cut the hole out for the point motors eventually, so there is a hole in the arch down there, which you can't quite see, but the point rod, or the rod from the motor, will go through there. And that's it. They're now just gluing together. Let the glue set, and then we'll work on printing out the front. So there's going to be a solid front made out of card going along there. Once I get the shape of it right, I'll then stick brick paper on top of it and then fold round these overhanging flaps from the interior arches. And then we'll do the same for the back. I'll use the same template, but I'll measure this distance and I'll measure this distance, so hopefully be able to print it out in one go to put on the top. Obviously there'll be brick paper on top of it, so any fettling that I need to do with a knife and some glue should be fine. So that's where we are so far. I think it's looking good, everything on plan. Okay, so here we are. I have printed out and test fit a piece of card that should cover the front of the 3 arches down here. I've then stuck on some brick paper, and now all I intend to do is essentially pop this on here, glue it to the faces, and then wrap around the tabs. I haven't done the one behind yet because I haven't yet measured these spaces, so I know how much wider to make these pieces on the one behind, but I'm going to put it on, see how it looks, and then come back. See you in a bit. There we go. I'm very pleased with that. The arches look great. Not all little flaps are glued down fully, but on the whole they look good. Where's the occasional white edge showing, for example here I actually tore one, the only one I've torn off the whole lot. I'll be able to fill that in, I hope, with just make the edge a bit of brown, a little bit of brown pen, and then once the varnish goes on, you tend to lose a lot of these little white edges. The same thing happened on the wide arch that I made, in exactly the same way. So quite pleased, and we'll see what happens when the glue's dried. So there we are, that's the back part of the viaduct printed out and stuck to card. As you saw before, we have one on this side which is 6mm wider than the one in the front, and this one is 14mm wider than the one in the front. Because I made the 3 arches just as boxes, don't need to really consider the curve and everything just seems to fit and work well. So all I need to do now is get this stuck onto here, and the back of the viaduct should be more or less complete. Printed the back out, stuck it on, the glue is dried. Let's have a look how it looks. I've not seen this myself yet. It only has to be passing, just has to be sufficiently passing for a photograph if it's ever taken from this kind of angle. So hopefully it'll be alright. It's been very difficult to get into the back of this. Obviously, in reality, it'll never be seen from the back because there's a wall around there. But let's play this back and see how it looks. So then, the little 1mm strips. They start off on a piece of cereal packet, to which I make these things. So there are several of these. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them. And what I do is I cut out these strips with the little tiny 1mm rectangles on, and I wrap around them, the whole thing, a piece of wide Scalescenes edging paper, edges. And because I wrap them right around the whole thing, there's a lot of surface for the glue to stick on, and I'm not worried about card wobbling, and I'm not worried about things getting really, really fiddly. Once that glue is dried, very, very, very dry, I can then use this guide here just to chop off the 1mm edge, and that is how I make it. So I'll take some more pictures as I go, but in the first place I'm going to cut out these strips and glue the edges around it. So once they're printed out and stuck, we ended up with these. So they're on the cereal packet. It's got the Scalescenes edging wrapped around it. And then what I do is I use the little guide here to essentially cut a 1mm tall sliver off. Once I've done that, I'm left with a very small edging piece which can then go on top of the walls that I've printed, if I can find them, for the inside of the viaduct. So they go on top of these, kind of like that, but obviously only sticking out 1mm, and then they go on the inside of the walls on the viaduct over there. So I'm going to print these out, cut these out now, stick them onto the walls and get the walls glued in. So once it's cut out, we end up with this little tiny sliver. It's about 1mm thin, and I can't actually get the camera to focus on it, it's that small. No look, not going to work, but you'll see how thin it is. It's 1mm, and it will go along the top of the wall like that somehow, and then I will stick that to the viaduct and see how it looks. So let's give it a go. So I think that's stuck on quite well. There's a little bit of shiny glue, but that will come off when I varnish it. It's stuck onto card that must be about, I don't know, 1/6 of a millimetre thick. So if this is only 1mm, then it's sticking out maybe 0.2, 0.3, maybe 0.4. Well, no, not that much. Yeah, maybe 0.2 of a millimetre from the edge. So it's ever so subtle, but it works quite well, I think. And once the edges are cut off and then it's put inside the viaduct wall, I think it will look good. So we'll give it a go, let the glue set for a little bit, and then give it a go and see how it looks. That doesn't look too bad. It's gone on quite straight. It looks like I was expecting, or as I was hoping. And then once we get another little bit of the thin thing along there, it'll look like it's a real pier. And then I'll do the same as I did with the wide arch, and I'll put the coins down there. So I've got some of those ready to cut out. There. They'll go down the edge. Down there. And I think then it'll be almost done, just up onto the top. I think it's going to be quite successful. Do the other 5 of those now. And then take it away. So here we are with all the interior bits added, and it's starting to look good. I added one of the edge pieces, one of the coins down here, and this now looks super. But what I realised is, because I didn't have my measurements right when I was doing the bits that go around the edge, they go all the way down to here, like this. And I've tried colouring them in to try and hide them, but I haven't been able to do it really. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to print off another piece of this and stick it on the top, just to give a definite line to where these round bits end. So we'll put those on like that. Then when I put the piece across there, it'll look a lot neater, and then I'll put the coins on. So I'm going to do that now, put the coins on, and then I think I'm finished. I'm not going to do the ledge or the bit that goes on here, whatever that's called, or the wall, until I get the next arch in place, because there's going to be another bridge style skew arch here, and then I want to put the wall on until I know where the buttress is going to be. So we'll need it there, and we'll get the last bits finished, and then that'll be it. But it's looking really good. The curve is very subtle. It looks really well. If you look at it from above, it's curved quite a bit, just right. But from here, like I say, it's really subtle, and it looks super. There we are. Apart from the varnishing and the ledge and the top parapet wall, the viaduct, or at least these 3 arches, is finished. I'm not going to put the wall on the top yet. The reason being, the next arch, which is going to go here, is going to have buttresses again, so up to the top and here. So I'm going to put those on first before I then fill in the other bit of the wall. So it'll look a little bit like this side of the arch that I did last time. So for now, that's it. I've put the patches on, I've trimmed up the sides, and I've put the front little plinth on as well. I've cut out a little tiny bit of replacement for this one that was torn, and from a normal viewing angle of this, you really can't tell that it was ever missing. So that's it. I'm quite pleased with it. Obviously I've had to cut out a little bit of the lower wall here to cover that, but the ground level is going to be, oops, sorry about that. The ground level is going to be something like that, I think. So it's going to be below ground level, that. So once that's in place and the ground is in place, you'll never see those bits. So I'm quite happy. I'm pleased with the way the curve works. I decided not to bother finishing off this side. The edges are exposed, but you know, no one's ever going to look at it from there. If I ever do a photograph from around there, I can tidy up these edges just in Photoshop or something. So I've decided not to bother. Life's too short, even though we're locked in with nothing else to do of an evening. But that's it. So Just want to say, anybody who's actually watching this in these strange, troubled times, hope that you're all okay. Stay safe, keep washing those hands, and join me, I hope so, in 2 weeks when the next arch should be in place. I've already cut off the template, and it's another skew arch, this time wider on this side than that side, so it's going in the opposite direction to the wide arch that I did. But there we are, it's also a lot wider, or at least 50% wider than the arches over here, just to give it a nice kind of large arch like this. So come back in a couple of weeks, hopefully that'll be on, but Chandwell Viaduct is starting to look quite good.